Why does humanity fear the dark? Is it the absence of light, or is it the whispers of that silent, nameless horror lurking within the darkness? Are those distorted silhouettes we see when our eyes adjust to the dark merely a trick of the mind? Or are they the very embodiment of an ancient hunger lying beyond our perception, waiting to feed on us? Today we will go far beyond a simple struggle for survival. We will dig beneath the rotten truth hidden beneath that innocent illusion of chopping wood, building a fire, and waiting for morning. We will discuss the sick history of the Don't Starve Together's universe. But this story does not begin with the humanity we know. Long before the shadows took over this universe, a magnificent civilization lay miles beneath the Earth's surface. We call them the Ancients. While the world's surface was still shrouded in primal silence, they were an intelligent, insect-like race that built colossal cities deep within dark caverns. They possessed a flawless order, magnificent architecture, and profound science. However, as is the fate of every great civilization, their downfall was not brought about by an external enemy, but by the endless greed within themselves. One day, deep within the earth, they discovered an element, tulasite. This was not merely a valuable mineral, it contained pure cosmic energy. By refining this metal, the ancients attained unimaginable power. But this power came at a price. The energy of the metal was no innocent magic. It was directly linked to the shadows. Every time they used it, an invisible gas, a kind of cosmic radiation, was released into the air. Nightmare fuel was less a physical substance than a disease that infected the soul. In their intoxication with power, the ancients used this fuel so excessively that the shadows began to seep into their minds. It permeated the streets of their cities, the walls of their temples, and ultimately their very genetic code. That mighty race paid the price for its arrogance in the most hideous way. Nightmare fuel did not merely kill them, it deformed them, shattered them, and imprisoned them in endless agony. Today, deep within the game, in those pitch-black caverns, you encounter those repulsive, faceless monsters made of flesh. They are that very race, the diseased remnants of a once glorious race, swallowed by shadows and driven mad. Their civilizations collapsed, their cities turned to rubble, and the constant universe returned to its cosmic silence, nourished by the screams of its original inhabitants, until it encountered a man whose arrogance was greater even than that of the insects beneath the earth. The year was the early 1900s. A pitiful man, with his lack of talent clinging to his shoulders like a shackle, was walking through the gloomy streets of London. His name was William Carter. He wasn't a magician. He was just a pathetic illusionist who pulled rabbits out of hats and tried to make ends meet with cheap sleight of hand. People didn't watch him in awe. They pitied him. But what lay within William wasn't helplessness. It was an uncontrollable, sickening greed. He wanted to play God, to have people worship him, to feel a mix of fear and respect toward him. With that hope, he spent his last penny to set off for America, the land of opportunity. A new name, a new life. But fate never rewards the vision of a man without talent. In America, only greater misery, greater hunger, and a quagmire of debt awaited him. He thought it was all over. The dilapidated train he boarded to escape his creditors derailed in the middle of the night in the desert. Miraculously, he survived amidst the piles of metal, screams, and flames. As he crawled through the wreckage, covered in blood, he heard something whispering to him. It wasn't a voice. It was an eerie vibration that penetrated directly into his mind. Beneath the wreckage lay an ancient book with pitch-black leather and no inscription on its cover. The Codex Umbro. That book was the open gateway to the constant world. It was a poisonous hook extended by the shadows into our reality. When William picked up the book, the darkness pouring from its pages flowed directly into his mind. The book did not teach him formulas, spells, or prayers. It showed him directly how to bend nothingness. That night in the desert, the pitiful William Carter died. From the ashes, the most arrogant, darkest, and most powerful showman history had ever seen was born. The great Maxwell. Maxwell had attained everything he desired. But pride is an insatiable beast. To make his shows even bigger, to terrify the audience, he needed an assistant. That was when the story's greatest tragedy began. Charlie stepped onto the stage. Charlie was the complete opposite of Maxwell. She was a young woman, innocent, cheerful, and full of hope for life. She didn't know the dark secret behind Maxwell's shows. To her, it was all just a magnificent stage show crafted by a talented man. Maxwell used Charlie as a shield to hide his own corrupted soul, balancing that demonic stage with the illusion of an angel. The Codex Umbro was no ordinary book of spells. That entity was a parasite. The more he used the book, the more the shadows seeped into his mind, beginning to control him like a puppet. The power had slipped beyond Maxwell's control, and on the night of the final performance, the inevitable catastrophe struck the stage. When Maxwell unleashed the shadows to bring that dark performance to its climax, he forgot to close the door. This time, the shadows seeped into our physical world not as an illusion, but as greedy entities. Massive black hands tore through the stage, ripping apart the fabric of reality. As Charlie's innocent scream echoed off the theater walls, the darkness swallowed them whole. Both Maxwell, the embodiment of arrogance, and the innocent Charlie, who had done nothing wrong, were pulled into their own universe, the Constant. When Maxwell awoke, he was no longer a god. He thought he had merely stepped into a new universe, but in reality, he'd awakened in his own hell. The shadows granted him the power he so desperately craved. They seated him on the throne of nightmares. But this was no throne of judgment, it was a torture device. The shadows' diseased energy pierced directly from the throne's roots into Maxwell's brain. They gave him power, but they condemned him to that throne for eternity. Maxwell was now a slave who believed he was ruling the Constant. To sustain the shadows, he was forced to lure new victims to the Constant from his own world through radios and whispers. As he sat on his throne, he felt himself losing his mind bit by bit, his flesh rotting away. But the true horror was not Maxwell's punishment. The real tragedy was the fate of that innocent soul, Charlie. Charlie was not seated on the throne. He was cast into the pitch-black darkness of this eerie universe. In that freezing, corrupting darkness of the Constant, Charlie walked alone for months. She was left alone with her fear, her loneliness, and her madness. Her mind suffered such a profound trauma that it eventually shattered. Charlie's innocent soul was split in two. One half remained a young woman still searching for light, compassion, and those old, joyful days, but the other half fused with the darkness itself. When the campfire dies out in the game, that invisible horror, the one that sizzles toward you from the pitch-black darkness and severs your flesh from your bones with a single blow, is none other than Charlie himself. With her innocence, her shattered pain, and her madness, Charlie has become the Constant's most deadly hunter. When you extinguish the fire, you're not just hiding from the shadows. You're trying to protect yourself from the wrath of that woman screaming in the darkness, alone and mad. That is the Constant, an endless nightmare built on the arrogance of insects, opened by the greed of a sorcerer, and ruled by the madness of an innocent woman. Maxwell needed sacrifices for his throne, and this silent call would be answered by another man. One who is like Maxwell, would succumb to his own arrogance. Wilson was intelligent but a failure. He had experienced countless failed experiments. He was a man cast out by the scientific community, living in misery. Just as Maxwell had once been a talentless magician, Wilson was a genius who had yet to discover his potential. Pride was the common sin of both. One night, the silence in his laboratory was broken by a static noise coming from his radio. A mocking, high-pitched voice rose from the static. Maxwell, on the throne, was whispering, "Things don't seem to be going well. If you like, I can give you some secret information." Wilson's pride instantly silenced his reason as he transcribed those eerie formulas and forbidden mechanics pouring from the radio onto paper. He didn't even realize he was signing his own death warrant. With the whisper of shadows, he built a massive twisted machine of wood and iron in the middle of his room. It was not an invention. It was a gateway to the universe of the Constant. The moment Wilson flipped the machine switch, the laboratory ceiling vanished in an instant. Enormous dark hands seeping through the crack grabbed him by the wrists and, amid his screams, dragged him into the void, into that endless cycle. When Wilson opened his eyes, he was no longer in the world. Maxwell stood towering over him with that mocking demeanor, ready to greet his new victim. "You don't look too good. You'd better find something to eat before night falls." This wasn't friendly advice. It was the hunter dictating the rules of the game to his prey, and Maxwell dispersed like a cloud of dust and vanished. Wilson quickly learned the ruthless mathematics of this new universe. It didn't operate by the laws of nature. As the trees lost their minds, they turned into monsters. Shadows took on flesh and bone. But the greatest horror began when night fell. When the light faded completely, that hissing sound coming from the darkness was the rage of a mad Charlie. Wilson died. He was torn apart by wolves, his mind shattered by starvation. In the darkness, he was swallowed by the night monster. But dying was no salvation in the Constant. Death was merely a cycle. His body was recreated time and again in the ancient resurrection stone. The shadows wanted their victims to suffer, to succumb to despair, and then to rise again and produce that fuel for the nightmare. Wilson was the fresh raw material within this cosmetic machine, but he was no ordinary victim. Instead of losing his mind, he learned to use that madness as a weapon. Wilson descended into Constance's deepest, most diseased layers and finally reached the center of that endless nightmare, the nightmare's core. When Wilson approached the throne, he expected to find Maxwell, that godlike, all-powerful being who had mocked him. But the sight before him left him frozen in place. The thing sitting on the throne was no god. It was a skeleton, flesh clinging to its bones, eyes sunken into their sockets, groaning with age and pain. Maxwell was not the king of this universe, but its greatest and most tragic victim. The chains had cut into his flesh, and his mind had long since melted away into that darkness. When he saw Wilson, he could only manage a pained smile. Wilson hesitated. But there was only one way to break this cycle. He flipped the switches on the ancient lock beside the throne. The chains snapped. The moment Maxwell collapsed from the throne to the ground, a century's worth of age enveloped his body in an instant, and he turned to ash before Wilson's eyes. That arrogant illusionist had finally dissolved into nothingness, but the shadow's hunger remained unquenched. The throne could not remain empty. Massive black hands shot up from the ground, grabbed Wilson, who had saved Maxwell, by the wrists, and nailed him to that cursed board. The cycle was complete. The king was dead. Long live the new king, they had said, until that unexpected third entity intervened in the story. Charlie, that innocent assistant, that sorrowful spirit torn apart within the darkness and transformed into a nightmarish beast. As Wilson writhed on the throne, Charlie stepped into the throne room with grace and silence. She no longer needed to be saved. She was not a victim of the darkness. She had become the darkness itself. He approached Wilson, touched his face, and ripped him from the throne like trash, flinging him back into the Constance's savage nature. Wilson was no longer the slave of the throne. And then Charlie sat upon that throne, but she did not writhe in agony like Maxwell. The shadows did not embrace her. Instead, they lined up around him like soldiers kneeling before their queen. Charlie rewrote the Constance rules. She unleashed her own twisted aesthetic, industrialization, and colossal new monsters into the universe. She was not a slave. She was the absolute and sole ruler of this cosmic realm, but the true battle was not the cliché struggle between darkness and light we know. The greatest philosophical horror lay hidden within that faint sphere glowing in the sky. When Charlie seized the throne, the threat was not darkness, but pure light. This celestial entity, known as the moon Altera, has begun to cast its sickly glow across the fabric of the universe. Humanity's greatest illusion is the belief that light always represents goodness. In the world of Don't Starve, shadows terrify you, drive you mad, and tear you apart. But under the moon's pure white light, you cease to go mad. The moon erases your pain, your fears, and your desires. It grants you absolute peace, but in exchange, it steals your will. The beings infected by the moon, the Gestalts, are now soulless puppets that no longer feel pain, but are completely hollow inside. So while the shadow turns you into a monster, the light enslaves you. Charlie's greatest battle right now is to protect her own dark kingdom from the invasion of this false light, this sickening enlightenment. So who is behind all this chessboard? Was it only Maxwell who lured Wilson into a trap with that radio? Remember that small mark on the radio. Robert Wagstaff, the founder of Vox Radios, is a great scientist. We now know he didn't discover the constant by accident. He was aware of everything from the very beginning. He roams that universe through holograms, absorbing the energy of both sides, shadow and light, to carry out his own secret agenda. Perhaps the fall of the ancients, Maxwell's arrogance, and Charlie's rise were all nothing more than radiation within the massive test tube set up by that sociopathic genius Wagstaff, who sought to connect the universes and attain divine power. We continue to feed those tiny characters on the screen and strive to keep the fire burning. Yet, unaware of the true purpose of the trees, shadows, and artificial light in the sky, we are merely ants within that vast cosmic game,